And welcome to the second session of the day in the Vein High Five Partner Alliance showcase. This time we're going to talk to, or we're going to see a presentation from Mike Newman at the award-winning My1Login company. And they're going to talk about how integrating Vein ID 5 really helps to remove user friction, improve security, and using their single sign-on solution will really ease a lot of the problems we're seeing in the market with breaches from passwords and user frustration and the costs associated with having to look after passwords. So have you started the recording, Adam? Good. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Mike Newman now. Mike.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Newman from My1Login, and as Andy mentioned, what we'd like to cover today is a bit of a demonstration and an outline of how My1Login, in partnership with Hitachi and the Vein ID 5 product, are actually able to eliminate the need for users to manage passwords or no passwords in enterprise, which sounds like a bit of a utopian situation, but it is actually entirely possible with the solutions that we present to you today. So this session is really about waving goodbye to passwords, and that is quite literally the case, as you'll see. So what we'll do is we'll do a very brief, a very quick demo just to give you an overview of how what the service looks like from a user perspective, and then a kind of recap of the typical problem, the challenges, and the impact on enterprises of users having passwords and managing passwords. We'll look at the typical approaches that other identity management vendors have taken to try and address this problem. And then finally, we'll outline how My1Login and Hitachi can help. And I'll do at that point, I'll also do a recap on the demo, just so that, you know, once everyone has understood the product set a bit more, you can get another recap in that, and feel free to ask any questions throughout. So just to give you an idea of what's in the art of the possible. So with the partnership with the technologies, the user can just very simply log in to the Windows, the normal Windows or the directory login screen, simply using their hand, and it's as straightforward as that. The user chooses which hand to use, and the Vein ID 5 product will essentially automatically recognize and authenticate that user, enabling them access into the directory. Once they're on the directory, My1Login then seamlessly takes over, and let's say they want to launch a next desktop executable like SAP. They launch the executable, My1Login takes over, and again seamlessly authenticates them with that application without the user having to do anything, without the user having to navigate to any portal. So that was a Windows desktop executable app. This time the user wants to access a web application that uses passwords. But actually the user doesn't need to know the passwords anymore, because they just navigate to that web application and My1Login will automatically sign them in. So what you'll see there is it's all totally seamless from a user perspective, but there's full security and audit and governance around the access to those applications through the use of the central identity management system. If you wish to offer your users a portal, you can, sorry, it's just a little bit of background somewhere. If you could go and mute if you don't mind, that would be very helpful. Thank you. So in this occasion, the user has accessed AWS via a portal, and this can have your branding on it. And that is, again, seamless login into a web application, in that case using SAML, where the user doesn't have to know any passwords. And finally, going back to that SAP application, the desktop executable, you can even launch that from inside the web portal. So in this case, the user launches the SAP application from the web portal and is seamlessly authenticated without having to know or remember the passwords. So that's the product in action. What we'll talk about now is generally, just to go back, and we will do another, as I said, another demonstration of that at the end, just for anyone who didn't quite pick up on what was going on. But passwords obviously carry a cost. Passwords carry a cost in terms of the prevalence of them being used as an attack vector for data breaches and corporate breaches, which cause reputational, financial, brand damage. That there is a cost of managing these passwords. There's a cost of productivity and logging into systems. There's a user experience hit in terms of morale and frustration from a user point of view in managing passwords. And then there's all the significant risks associated with phishing, because if your users have more, have passwords to manage, then they'll tend to do risky things with those passwords to make it easy, make their own lives easy, and that makes them susceptible to phishing risks. So there's a big cost, as we all know, associated with passwords, but passwords are still very much a necessary part of complex enterprise architectures. So it's fine for, your average user might log into the corporate directory, for instance, Azure or AD, and they receive seamless authentication into some of the Microsoft ecosystem applications. You might also already have an IAM or single sign-on solution in place that works with some of the other systems, but quite often you'll find that when you go out and actually talk to the end users, there is a huge proliferation of systems that still require passwords that aren't actually integrated with the corporate environment. So that could be a corporate communications tool, it could be online training services. Then there's the whole world of Windows desktop apps, which are still very heavily relied on and prevalent in enterprises. Some of these are very custom applications being built in-house. Some of these are old mainframes running on emulators. Some of these are RDP sessions into other devices and terminals. Now, all of these require authentication, and users still manage passwords for these. And then, you put on top of that the virtualized infrastructures that we have today, where Citrix and VMware all require authentication, and it's usually password based, which doesn't necessarily integrate easily with the corporate directory. And finally, there's this whole world out there of shadow IT, because it's never been easier for users to autonomously adopt and start using applications within departments for legitimate corporate use, but without IT actually knowing about it. And IT usually find out when it's too late, and either an event or breach has happened, or someone has left the business with some mission, with some credentials for what has become a critical system. So there's that whole world of shadow IT out there as well that needs to be considered as part of any identity and access management strategy. So what do users do? So for the expectation of the business is that they have written a 40-page policy that says, this is how you create our users, this is how you should act to create passwords. But actually the reality is that users just want to take the path of least resistance and do what's easiest for them to get the job done. And sometimes that means they will do insecure things with your corporate assets of passwords, which places your corporate systems and data at risk. And if that means for them that it's easier for them to upload passwords onto a spreadsheet or put it in Dropbox because it gives them easy access to passwords, or maybe their mobile phone, then that's what they will do. And all of that, as we know, creates a huge attack surface for malicious actors. It also leads to compliance fines, and there's a whole array of compliance obligations that we're now faced with and in adhering and complying with. But there's also a direct cost associated with it. So there's a direct cost to the help desk and the administrative cost of managing these passwords and systems. There's the onboarding, and so the whole life cycle management piece is a big cost. And then there's the inefficiencies from password-related user downtime. So how much, downtime is there while users either struggle to remember passwords or actually forget them and have to go through a reset process? All of that causes a significant hit to productivity in the enterprise. And if you look at the evolution of authentication, obviously in the 90s, everything just was linked to the Windows login, and quite a lot of applications were standalone and linked to that. But some had direct, executables that needed passwords. And as you get into the 2000s, then we're moving towards Active Directory, and you might have an on-premise or a legacy enterprise IAM solution that maybe work for a small subset of your applications, but not all of them. Moving into the 2010s, and what we've seen is obviously the emergence of cloud IAM providers, which is great, and they become, very compatible when it comes to web and cloud applications. But actually, you still have this gap where things like the legacy applications that are still in use don't integrate with it. Typically, there are a huge number of public cloud applications and shadow IT apps being used that aren't integrated with the IAM solution, and that's all compounding the challenge. And then you have the user, and users' behaviors have changed as well, and expectations have changed, and more the user is used to engaging with biometric interfaces to make their life easier in order to access applications and data. But now what's happened is with the increase of these additional cloud apps that don't integrate with the IAM, with the legacy apps, and with virtualized apps, all of that is increasing the attack surface, because it means more and more passwords and identities that are in the hands of the users and not under the control of the business. And especially in today's world, as we move to remote working, the level of risk has never been greater. And that's all moving IAM from a nice to have to a must have part of your enterprise architecture. If you look at the typical way that the world approaches the whole IAM space and trying to eliminate password, then if the solutions that are out there at the moment are typically, they are good for single sign-on for web. They are typically cloud-based, therefore easy to deploy, which reduces time to value for you as an organization. But they're not so good for biometric integration without needing some sort of specialized hardware integration. They're also not so good for single sign-on for virtualized and thin client apps and Windows desktop executables. So you end up with this gap in the corporate IAM, where employees receive single sign-on for some applications, but not all applications. And finally, some of these vendors, typically the encryption approach is they take your user identities and they encrypt them on their servers using encryption keys that they have access to. So in other words, the vendors that provide these services have access to the encryption keys that protect the identities that are your corporate identities that are protecting your data, which is a fundamental risk. So we like to think about, well, what would ideal look like in this world of IAM? Well, obviously you want something that's good for single sign-on for web and good for being cloud-based and easy to deploy. But actually, from a Windows login perspective, you want totally frictionless biometric integration. So in other words, something that can run without any specialized hardware and pretty much can operate, or therefore on any standard laptop. So any device with a standard camera, can be operated without needing any kind of high spec interface. So if you take the Windows Hello needs a high spec IR camera. But you actually, why should it not be compatible with any device that's got a camera on it? But you also want the single sign-on. Once you're logged in and authenticated with Windows, you also want the single sign-on beyond that to integrate with all application types. So thin client applications, virtualized apps, Windows desktop applications, as well as web applications. And you want it to do that irrespective of whether there are connectors or APIs. So you want to do it without the need for APIs. And finally, you want to employ an IAM solution that where it's storing user identities, the vendor has no access to your passwords. So in other words, you want that data to be encrypted within your environment, inside the perimeter of your enterprise network, and then with the vendor only storing the output of the encryption process, which is totally useless and impossible to decrypt without the relevant encryption keys, which are in your enterprise network. In other words, the zero trust model. And that proposition is exactly what My1Login and Hitachi have to offer. So it reduces user friction. So the joint approach of using the Vein ID 5 product at the front end, so you simply raise your hand to the camera, authenticate, and then My1Login will take care of all other application, all other authentication behind the scenes. That's what enables this totally seamless login process, enabling users to mitigate cybersecurity risks, control all user identities through the system, and provide seamless authentication for all types of application. So fundamentally, reduces that user friction at the front end, mitigates password security risks, and provides seamless authentication. I'll now hand over to Andy for the next slide. Oh, sorry, not yet, Andy. Sorry, Andy. So in summary, logging in at the front end with the Vein ID 5 product using your PAM enables you to access all of the other applications behind the scenes. So it provides single sign-on that works for all apps without any need for APIs, seamlessly linked to the user's directory login. So the user doesn't have to know about the IAM system. The user just has to raise their PAM to log in. And it's also cloud-based, so reduces the time to value for complex enterprise deployments and making it really straightforward. And finally, it uses a zero trust model for the way the encryption is handled to protect the data. So My1Login, we have customers across a variety of sectors, but notably in there, you'll see most of our customers talk about 100% application integration. But notably, we also work with security and defence customers, including one of the most secure branches of the UK Police Force, the Civil Nuclear Police, where our services used to protect critical national infrastructure. We have a full suite of modular and integrated IAM products between the partnership with Hitachi and the core My1Login products. So it's a very modular and integrated approach to IAM that is cloud-based and makes it easy to deploy, but fundamentally has client-side encryption at its heart, which means it's orders of magnitude more secure than almost every other competitor on the market. As a result of that approach to encryption, we've swept up a huge number of awards over the last 2 years, including the Best Identity Management Solution just about 2 months ago. Now just over to Andy, I guess, to give you a bit more detail on the Vein ID 5 product and how that works. Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think the integration for me is really exciting because for a user, they're really staying on the same journey they've always had. So there's no deviation from what they would have done normally. They will turn up to their normal Windows environment. They'll log in just by using their hand now, which is simple and easy for them to use. They're not having to run additional services or something more complex. And I think that makes the joint proposition really compelling and exciting. So, you know, what we talk about and why Vein ID 5 is much more superior to a lot of other technologies and why it offers something much stronger than a lot of other biometrics. You know, because we're using the vein patterns, they're contained internally within the skin, so much harder for somebody to take without the users being complicit and their knowledge and their understanding that that's gone on. They also remain much more consistent. We typically say from about 18 months onwards, the vein pattern is pretty consistent in makeup, and because we capture a mathematical representation of it rather than a picture or an image, that provides a lot of security benefits, but also means that we can cope with the growth that a normal human would go through, which means it's useful for children. And also because of the blood flow, it's also very, very good for detecting proof of life. Next slide, please, Mike. So how do we capture the template and what's the process? Well, the user presents their hand to the standard laptop camera, and as we've talked about before, this isn't new, the technology of capturing the vein pattern. Hitachi have been doing this for 20 years, but what's unique and new is the ability at the moment to capture it with a standard laptop camera, and obviously coming in the future will also be the ability to use mobile devices and tablets. And what we're doing is capturing the vein pattern that's scanned and captured using the standard camera. Once the vein pattern's captured, that is then mathematically augmented and encrypted, and that's a unique template for that user. And we used the template we capture on the way out is then not the template we use to authenticate the user. So that increases the ability to detect false positives or people trying to create an attack on our system. And then once the user's authenticated, as Mike talked about, the encryption then between is incredibly strong as well. So we're ensuring that the whole user journey is safe, secure, and of an extremely high quality from a security point of view, but also from a user experience is very easy and straightforward. Because I think one of the challenges many organizations have struggled with before is when they've tried to implement something to remove passwords, because passwords have been seen as the weakest link for, I think Bill Gates started trying to remove passwords 25 years ago and failed. So now we have a chance to really offer the user a great, simple experience without the need for additional hardware or additional complexity to their daily lives, which, as Mike said, users find ways to work around and to do things more easily if it suits them. So I think, Mike, we're going to show the demo again, just so everybody saw it once, and we'll show it again now. Now we've talked through how it works, so hopefully people can get a better feel for exactly what goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy. And so that hopefully gives a good articulation of the process. So just to replay, once the user is authenticated with Windows using their hand, they simply then launch the application they want to access, whether that is a web application or a Windows desktop application, and without any need for any kind of API or pre-canned integration, the user will be seamlessly authenticated with that application. So it literally could not be more straightforward from a user perspective. So just to watch that in action again. So we have the Windows login process where user would normally sign in using a username and password and perhaps a domain details. They just choose which hand they're using to authenticate, and simply hold up their hand to the screen, and they will be authenticated with the directory. Okay, so that user's now been authenticated with the corporate directory. They want to launch, in this case, it's a Windows desktop executable app called SAP. And they launch that application. My1Login detects they've got an identity and seamlessly authenticates them with that application without the user having to know passwords. Now the user wants to launch a web application. So again, they just go straight to the web application they wish to access, which in this case is a web application called AccuRanker. They simply click to go to a bookmark or the URL for that application, and My1Login seamlessly authenticates them, again without the user having to know or enter any passwords there. So that's the user now being authenticated with that app. Again, that was totally seamless. The user didn't have to know about any IAM system. However, if you wish, you can also offer the user a portal where they can launch any of their applications from, including web and Windows desktop. So in this case, the user is going to launch AWS, which is a SAML-based application, and My1Login seamlessly authenticates them with that application, again, without the need for any passwords. And then finally, we are going to close that down and launch the SAP, the SAP application, which is a Windows desktop executable. and you can even launch that from the web portal. So you'll see it here being launched, and this launches a Windows desktop app, and that's the user being authenticated. So a couple of different options there for the user experience, but at its core, it means it's totally seamless and frictionless from a user perspective, and fundamentally means that you are removing passwords from the hands of the users where they do risky things with them, and placing the organization, placing the enterprise back in control of corporate identities. And if the users don't know passwords, how can they be phished for them? So you're actually significantly addressing your phishing risks there as well. So that, I guess, is it from the presentation and the demonstration. Hopefully that's given you an idea how we jointly help wave goodbye to passwords and make that a reality. And I think we'd be happy to take any questions now, Andy. I think we've got the chat open for questions.
Yep, the chat is open if anybody wants to ask any questions. I think we've got one straight away. The first question is from Marek. How do you handle the usernames of the applications that you connect behind? Also, do you store the passwords of each app encrypted behind as well? So I think that's a good question, Mike.
Yeah, great question. So My1Login stores the encrypted output of the encrypted usernames and passwords. So all of the data, the identities are encrypted client-side inside the enterprise environment, unlike our competitors. So typically with our competitors, they ship your identities, the passwords, up to their servers and then encrypt it on their servers using keys they have access to. We don't believe that's good enough. So we encrypt all of the data is encrypted by My1Login inside your enterprise network. The encryption keys never leave the perimeter of your enterprise network. So all we ship up the wire and store is the output of the encryption process, which is totally impossible to decrypt without the corresponding decryption keys, and My1Login does not even have any access to those keys. So it's as a result of that level of security, and that which is orders of magnitude above the typical way that other vendors employ or architect their security. It's because of that level of security that we typically work with a lot of the organizations where security is paramount, like defense and policing industries.
Okay, good. Any more questions from anybody? Okay, right. In such case, what do you do if you need to renew the password of the app? Is there a panel for the user to manage them, or is that taken away from the user?
Yep, great. Another good question. So there's a few different options for that, and it can be configured the way you want to set you want to set it as the administrators of the platform. So for instance, you can set application specific policies centrally in the My1Login system that actually will force a change to the user passwords on the target applications the next time the user logs in. And then actually you can automatically generate, let's say, 40 character high entropy random passwords for your users, set them on the target application, and then hide them from the user on the My1Login system so the user doesn't know that password. So that's one way of dealing with it. Alternatively, you have the option to set a policy which allows the users to automatically press a button if they navigate to the password change page. My1Login can automatically detect that and suggest a new password for them, that they just click a button to update it, and it seamlessly synchronizes with My1Login. So there's a few different options around that, but that use case is well catered for by My1Login.
Yeah, I think as well there might be another integration we can look at longer term as we do some password management through Vein ID 5 as well. So I think an extra bit of integration here when we explore longer how we do a full integration and how we really make this work in a corporate environment could lead us to some different solutions. So that's quite exciting.
Yeah, And I think one of the other ones on that, Andy, is we've already talked about the step-up authentication, essentially, where even at an app, once the user has authenticated with the directory, the user can launch a specific application, but My1Login will then defer back to the Hitachi, the VNID 5 product for essentially a step-up or re-authentication before enabling the user to access that. So you can place that step-up authentication on more sensitive applications. So.
Yeah, absolutely. If the user was suddenly going to process a payment or do something that was much higher risk, we might want to check it's still that user sitting in front of the machine and not, somebody else has gained access somehow. So I think the two solutions together provide a very compelling solution for the customers, and a great user experience makes a big difference. So, Mike, thank you very much for your time. Everybody, thank you very much for attending. Very well attended session again. And as said before, the recording will be live on our YouTube channel in a few days. And I look forward to welcoming the rest of you back to some of the sessions later on today. So thank you very much, Mike, and thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.